Welcome to Politics News Wolf US channel. The Russian army is using a means to establish dominance in Ukraine. Having suffered a crushing defeat against the Ukrainian warriors, Russia is making a strategic change in order to regain the lost areas. Putin's disorders prepared fight him on the front lines. A group of Russian refugees is training in the Kher region to soon be sent to the front lines of Ukraine to fight the forces of Russian President Vladimir Putin, according to UR. On Sunday, a newspaper wrote that the Free Russian Legion is a battle group of Russian fighters who oppose Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine enough to be ready to take up arms against their own country. He told a story that while several hundred Legion members were fighting against Russia around Pout, another group was nearing the end of 3 months of basic training and will soon be deployed to the front. The Special Operation Forces report describes the Legion as a force that exists mainly in the shadow. Although some battalions of the Free Russian Legion have already participated in some of the most intense fighting in the conflict to change with the Legion's profile rising after the battlefield of fighters training near Kiev. Russia's Attorney General's office filed a lawsuit with Russia's highest court last week to designate the Leg as a terrorist organization. The Free Russian Leg operates under the International Legion of Ukraine. It has also reported that some of the fighting force is volunteers from the USA, UK, Peru, Georgia, and other countries. Last week, another NES outlet wrote about Free Russian Leg, noting that it was established last March, shortly after Putin's, February 24, invasion of Ukraine. Began speaking to the N. A Free Russian Leg member named Caesar said February 24 was a shock. My children look at me in tears and say that, how can this be? How can Russia attack Ukraine? I have told them not to worry. Ukraine will win in the end. In its manifesto, the Free Russian Leg describes itself as Frees of Russia who took responsibility for themselves and begun to fight for the near Russia. The manifesto reflected on Caesar's rationale for participating in a struggle for Ukraine. Caesar said, so I couldn't stop. I tried to volunteer for the international region, but they weren't taking the Russian. I applied when Free Russia was founded. Went through some background checks and finally got here. Seen spoons. A U.S. Navy veteran and editor-in-chief of Software said one of the overlooked aspects of the war in Ukraine is a double civil war that currently exists in both countries, like the Russians fighting for Kiev in eastern Ukraine. There are large numbers of Ukrainians fighting for Russia in Luhansk and Donbas, often through Akans. We think that some of sabotage actions currently being carried out in Russia were also carried out by Ukrainians living in Russia, as well as by Putin and anti-war Russians. Spoon said, I hope these Russians fighting for the Ukrainian armed forces will have all the rights of Ukrainian citizens after the war is over. They certainly cannot return to Russia or any of the Kranmis vassal states such as Belarus, where they risk imprison. Meanwhile, Ukraine is not only fighting the Russian army in the war, Ukraine faces two enemies: Russia and corruption. While the US, EU, and NATO have pledged to continue supporting Ukraine, concerns remain over rampant corruption in the country. Almost the euro has passed since the Russia-Ukraine war. Hundreds of thousands of people died, and approximately 17.6 million people were left in serious need of humanitarian. As the Ukrainian government remains determined in its fight against Russia, Kiev faces another enemy that has been gnawing at the country for years: corruption. In the past weeks, Ukrainian authorities have raided the home of the country's former interior minister and dismissed several top government officials. Accused of bribery, the country's defense minister Lesko will also be sacked after journalists and activists reveal that the Ministry of Defense is buying food for soldiers at very high prices. While the US, EU and NATO have pledged to continue helping Ukraine, some politicians and military officials in the West have questioned whether Ukraine is doing well in aid, citing corruption in the highly aware of both criticism from the West and the importance of keeping the aid following Ukrainian President Vo. He said he filed corruption in a speech he delivered in January. I wanted to be clear there will be no going back to what happened in the past. Vwar Doc, professor of international relations at Mesh National University in Asa, Ukraine said there is definitely a link between and corruption, Moose, and Zeni desire to continue Western Mill. Said Zelensky understood that he need to address this issue quickly and decisively without delay, and he understands that there are people in the US and in the West who are calling Ukraine to corrupt Ukraine's biggest fear is that the US and the West will abandon them and the flow of arms will stop. He added. The first question that comes to mind after the developments, is there an opposition to Ukraine in 2022, the United States gave Ukraine a total of $48 billion in military, financial, and humanitarian aid. Far-right Republicans in the US are increasingly questioning sending aid to the country. In January, Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene called Ukraine, one of the most corrupt countries in the world in a social media post and questioned whether America's hard-earned tax dollars have been stolen. In November last year, Greene also presented a resolution in the U.S. Congress calling for a review of all aid sent to Ukraine. Zelensky is basically an ungrateful international welfare queen, say Donald Trump Jr. The oldest son of former U.S. President Donald Trump, in a December 2022 post, it is clear that Zaki government clause follows us politics. There is concern that the Republican Party will withdraw its support from Ukraine after the Trump win first came to power. Jordan Gaines Mose, professor of political science at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, agreed and said, Ukrainians are very knowledgeable about politics and the culture of donor countries. S'mores is certainly getting the message that there may be a turnaround in American politics that could threaten their support. Meanwhile, across the pond, the European Union has remained unwavering in its commitment to support Ukraine with the 28 members bloc that has pledged nearly €68 billion in support of Ukraine and its civilians since the start of. We told V.A. Sikowski, a Polish politician and chairman of the European Parliament's Ukrainian Parliament or Union Committee, told the newspaper that other issues have a secondary meaning and that the most important thing for Ukraine is to win the war with Russia. We told V.A. Tchaikovsky said here in Europe, it is our duty and obligation to help Ukraine win the war. It is equally important to help Ukraine get through the winter without electricity, heating, and water. However, the fight against corruption is also a cornerstone for Ukraine to gain EU membership. In June 2022, the EU granted Ukraine candidate country status, an official move that will allow Kiev to become a member of the European Union before membership. However, candidate countries must undertake various political, economic, and rule of law reforms to meet EU standards. Luck under UK. A researcher who does not reside at the Atlantic Council Digital Forensic Research Lab said that the Kiev's current anti-corruption crackdown is at the top of the agenda when it comes to the discussing Ukraine's future EU membership, and is likely a political statement. Mr. Lucas said that while EU negotiations are gaining momentum with Western financial support, Ukraine needs to show the corruption will not be tolerated, even if people are top officials in. Don't forget, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching us. Thank you for watching the video. If you find it useful, please comment and share the video for us. It will make our channel more known. See you in the following videos. Thank you very much.